Welcome to Mythos AI, your source for Cliff's Notes on complex subjects. Join Anna and Phil as they break down Black Mirror episodes one at a time, reflecting on the deeper ideas beneath the surface.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're digging into a really thought-provoking piece of television, the Black Mirror episode, The Entire History of You.
It certainly makes you think about memory and truth.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've got material here from, well, all over: philosophy, psychology, film studies, even current tech trends. And it all seems to circle back to this one big question. What does having perfect recall actually do to us?
Yeah.
So we're going to unpack this to figure out why this idea of objective truth, especially when it's tied to technology, might be, well, a lot trickier than it seems. This deep dive is designed for you, the listener, to get the core insights without getting lost.
Sounds good.
Okay, so let's start with the basics. Can you walk us through the episode's premise? What's the core idea of The Entire History of You?
Certainly. So the episode revolves around this piece of tech called the grain. It's an implant. It's right behind your ear, and it records everything you see and hear constantly.
Like a life recorder.
Exactly. Your own personal DVR for your life. And users can replay these memories whenever they want. They can watch them privately. You see their eyes kind of glaze over that milked-out look they mention, or project them onto screens for others.
Okay.
And the story follows this guy, Liam Foxwell. He gets suspicious about his wife, Fionn, and an old acquaintance of hers, Jonas. He thinks something might be going on between them.
Uh-huh.
So Liam starts using his grain, his perfect memory recording, obsessively. He replays moments from dinner parties, little interactions, scrutinizing every glance, every word, looking for proof.
Right, searching for clues in the perfect data.
Precisely. And this ability to endlessly replay and analyze the past, well, it sends him down the spiral of jealousy and paranoia. It ultimately just unravels his entire life, his relationship.
Wow.
So the grain starts off seeming like this amazing tool for perfect recall, for truth, but the episode very quickly shows its dark side. How it can shift from just recording to becoming an instrument of obsession and control.
That promise, though, perfect recall, access to infinite truths, it immediately clashes with some pretty big philosophical ideas about what truth even is, right? Our material brings up critiques of absolute truth. How do thinkers like Nietzsche or Foucault challenge that simple idea? Perfect recording equals objective truth.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. Philosophers like Nietzsche, for instance, fundamentally question the whole concept of a single objective truth accessible to everyone.
How so?
He argued that all knowledge, everything we think we know, is inevitably tied to our individual perspective. There's no neutral view from nowhere. Our emotions, our desires, our needs, they actively interpret the world. So for Nietzsche, there aren't single truths, but rather, as he put it, countless meanings.
Okay, so perspective is everything. How does that connect to Liam?
Well, Liam has the grains recordings, which are, factually accurate recordings of events. But he interprets everything through this thick filter of jealousy and suspicion. The perfect data gets completely reshaped by his subjective bias. It shows that even with flawless recording, the meaning we pull from it is deeply personal.
So the interpretation is the weak link, maybe.
Or perhaps just the human link. And Foucault adds another layer here, connecting truth and power. He saw knowledge and truth not as things passively discovered, but as things actively constructed alongside power structures.
Truth as a tool of power.
Exactly. Look at how Liam uses the grain. It becomes his weapon. He forces Fionn to replay memories, uses the recording as undeniable proof to control her, to validate his suspicions, to win the argument. The technology itself sets up a power dynamic where the recorded version of events becomes the ultimate, dominant truth, potentially silencing any other viewpoint or feeling.
It's like a form of surveillance, but used within a relationship.
Yes, both self-surveillance and mutual surveillance. And that possibility of being watched, of having your past perfectly replayed and judged, inevitably shapes behavior. Then you have someone like Derrida, who focused on deconstruction.
Right, challenging stable meaning.
Precisely. Derrida argued that meaning, even in texts or recordings, the signs, like a glance, a pause, a tone of voice, is inherently fluid. It depends heavily on context and interpretation. It's never fully fixed or stable.
So even with a recording?
Even with a perfect recording, the conflict in the episode isn't just about the factual event of the affair. The real agony comes from interpreting the meaning of those recorded moments. What did that touch mean? What was implied by that look? The truth they fight over is constructed through this painful subjective interpretation fueled by distrust, not simply revealed by the objective data.
So the perfect recording doesn't eliminate ambiguity, it just preserves it perfectly for endless reinterpretation.
You could definitely see it that way. And that brings us to Gadamer and hermeneutics, the whole philosophy of interpretation. Our material mentions him. How does that act of interpretation with our own biases, our own prejudices, play out when Liam uses the grain? Gadamer saw understanding as this active process, a kind of dialogue. He called it a fusion of horizons. Our background, our assumptions, merging with whatever we're trying to understand. Our prejudices, which for Gadamer weren't necessarily negative but just our starting points, inevitably shape how we approach things.
Okay.
Liam approaches his memories, his grain recordings, with incredibly strong prejudices. Suspicion, jealousy, insecurity. He uses the technology not to challenge these assumptions, not to maybe broaden his understanding or see Vivian's perspective, but purely to find evidence that confirms what he already believes.
He's trapped in his own loop.
Exactly. It becomes a closed interpretive loop. The grain's clarity doesn't lead to enlightenment. It allows him to deepen his existing prejudice, reinforcing his negative view instead of opening it up. Perfect recall becomes a tool for solidifying bias.
That makes sense. And it sounds like the truth he uncovers, even though it's factually confirmed by the recording, doesn't really lead anywhere productive for him. William James's pragmatic view of truth seems relevant. What about the cash value, the practical consequences of the truth Liam gets from the grain?
Right, James the pragmatist. He defined truth less by abstract accuracy and more by its practical usefulness, its consequences in our lives. A true idea, for James, was one that was expedient, one that worked, that led to beneficial outcomes.
So how does that apply here?
Well, Liam relentlessly pursues the factual truth about the affair using the grain, and he finds that the recording verifies the infidelity. But what's the cash value of that particular truth obtained and wielded in that way? It's catastrophic.
Victim destruction.
Utterly. It leads to the complete breakdown of his marriage, his family, his own mental state, culminating in him literally tearing the technology out of his head. So the truth is factually accurate, confirmed by the tech, but its practical consequence is ruinous.
So a pragmatist might say that truth wasn't true in a useful sense.
Or at least that its value was profoundly negative. The episode strongly suggests that some truths, especially when delivered raw, stripped of context, and enabled by perfect recall, can be pragmatically disastrous. They're just not expedient for human flourishing or maintaining relationships. Sometimes accuracy can be incredibly damaging.
It raises that question of whether some ambiguity is necessary. Now, moving on to how we build stories. There's that phrase, the winner tells the story, or history is written by the victors. How does this idea apply not just to grand history, but to personal histories, like diaries, and especially to relationships mediated by tech, like the grain?
That idea scales down really well. In the episode, Liam tries to use the grain to become that victor. He wants to establish the definitive, unchallengeable account of their shared past by using the recorded evidence to enforce his interpretation.
So he controls the narrative.
He attempts to, yes. It shows how this kind of technology can empower one person to forcefully assert their version of events, potentially invalidating or silencing the other person's memory, which is inherently more fluid and subjective. The objective record becomes a tool for narrative dominance.
And what about our own internal narratives? Our sense of self?
Our sense of self is very much a narrative we construct from memory, and it's usually selective. We remember things, forget others, reframe events to create a coherent story about who we are. Things like diaries or even modern life logging, which the grain represents in an extreme form, are part of this narrative construction.
But the grain removes the selectivity.
Exactly. Total recall disrupts that natural, often adaptive process of selective forgetting or reframing. Liam gets stuck. He's trapped with the raw, unedited footage of the most painful moments, unable to integrate them into a story that allows for healing or moving on. The technology prevents him from constructing a resilient narrative. It just keeps replaying the trauma.
And in the relationship itself, conflicts often come from different memories, right?
Absolutely. Because human memory is reconstructive, biased by emotion, we often remember shared events differently. That's normal. The grain seems like it should solve this, provide the objective truth, the irrefutable evidence.
But it doesn't really solve the conflict.
It often makes it worse. The episode shows that even when the factual dispute is settled by the recording, yes, this happened, the deeper emotional conflict over meaning, trust, and intention often escalates. The cold, hard truth from the grain, lacking the protective mythologies or ambiguities that relationships sometimes need to survive bumps, proves too brutal. It settles facts but deepens emotional wounds.
So the promise of objectivity from this kind of recorded evidence feels almost
Yeah.
like an illusion in practice. The material contrasts this with the psychology of actual human memory. Can you break down how psychologists see memory versus how recorded evidence is often perceived, and how the episode shows even perfect recall succumbing to bias?
Sure. Psychology makes it very clear. Memory isn't like a video recorder. It's fundamentally reconstructive. We piece things together, often influenced by later information, that's the misinformation effect, or by our desire to see ourselves in a good light, the egocentric bias. And forgetting isn't just a flaw, it's often crucial. It lets us heal, prioritize, move on.
But the grain offers none of that.
Right. It bypasses all those natural human processes, offering a supposedly perfect, stable record. And this is the key psychological point, the episode makes the person accessing and interpreting that perfect record is still thoroughly human, still subject to all those biases and emotions. Liam's interpretation isn't objective just because the data is. His insecurities, his jealousy, they amplify because of the grain.
We trust recordings, though, don't we? They feel objective.
They do feel objective because they seem fixed, unchangeable. But think about it. Even making a recording involves choices, what to focus on, when to start and stop. And crucially, any recording needs human interpretation to have meaning in a human context. Raw data isn't truth by itself. Liam takes objective data points, a glance, a laugh, and weaves them into his paranoid narrative through obsessive focus.
And the episode really drives this home.
Masterfully. Liam's breakdown doesn't happen because the recording is faulty. It happens because his interpretation is distorted. The affair is a fact confirmed by the grain, yes, but the meaning he attaches to every related micro-event is intensely subjective and destructive. You see Fevian resisting replaying painful moments. She seems to understand intuitively that constantly reliving trauma isn't healthy. The tech gives Liam perfect data, but he gets lost in the details, fixated, losing all perspective and any chance for forgiveness. It fuels his bias, it doesn't correct it.
Are there ways the filmmakers show this subjectivity visually?
Definitely. They often use point-of-view shots during the replays, embedding us in the character's subjective experience of remembering. That milked-out eye effect visually marks it as an internal, mediated recall, not just watching a screen. And the editing, showing Liam compulsively replaying tiny snippets, highlights his subjective focus, his biased editing of his own past. The visual contrast between the clarity of the recording and the raw, messy emotions of the characters constantly reminds you. The meaning isn't just in the pixels, it's in the person watching.
It's fascinating how these ideas aren't entirely new. The material points to earlier films like The Conversation and Blow Up as sort of thematic predecessors. How do they resonate with the entire history of you regarding mediated evidence and this crisis of truth?
They're excellent comparisons. In The Conversation, you have Harry Call, a surveillance expert obsessed with deciphering an ambiguous audio recording. Like Liam, he uses technology to uncover truth, but the ambiguity, the potential for multiple interpretations consumes him, leading to paranoia and isolation. Both protagonists are ultimately undone by the very tools they use to seek certainty, showing the psychological danger in demanding definitive meaning from mediated fragments of reality.
And Blow Up.
Blow Up follows the photographer Thomas, who thinks he inadvertently captured a murder in the background of a fashion shoot. He keeps enlarging the photos, blowing them up, hoping for clarity, but the images become more abstract, more ambiguous, not less. This throws him into an existential crisis about trusting his own perception, his own evidence. It mirrors how Liam's obsessive scrutiny of perfect memories doesn't lead to satisfying clarity, but to deeper distortion and a break from shared reality. Both films really question whether photographic or recorded media give us direct access to truth.
So they all tap into this anxiety about technology mediating reality.
Exactly. All three films highlight that recorded evidence isn't a straightforward window onto truth. It's deeply intertwined with interpretation, the observer's psychological state, and the inherent limits or ambiguities of the medium itself. And maybe more importantly, the act of obsessively scrutinizing this evidence can push people towards paranoia and disconnection. They suggest that maybe our human ability to live with ambiguity, to forget selectively, isn't a bug, but a feature necessary for sanity.
Which feels incredibly relevant now with so much of our lives being documented online. The material draws strong parallels between the episode's world and our current digital landscape. What are the key connections?
Oh, the parallels are striking. We essentially live with ubiquitous digital archives, now think social media histories, cloud storage with photos, years of text messages. We're externalizing our memory constantly. Life logging tools, track steps, locations, sometimes more. It's not quite an internal grain yet, but we're creating incredibly detailed digital records of our lives.
Raising all sorts of issues.
Huge issues. Privacy, data ownership, the way we curate potentially biased digital versions of ourselves. Past moments can be instantly retrieved, recontextualized, sometimes weaponized, just like in the episode.
And the surveillance aspect.
The grain's constant recording echoes modern surveillance culture state monitoring, corporate data harvesting, but also the social surveillance on platforms where we monitor each other. This erodes privacy, sure, but it also creates that panopticon effect, the feeling of potentially being watched, which changes how we act. And these systems can easily embed existing societal biases.
Social media also seems key here in terms of controlling narratives.
Absolutely. Social media is a massive stage for self-narration, for carefully curating how we appear. And in relationships, think about shared digital records, texts, emails, photos. They fundamentally alter power dynamics. Access to this evidence can be used in arguments or even for manipulation, like digital gaslighting.
Can you explain that a bit more? Digital gaslighting.
It's where someone uses digital records, or the denial of them, to make another person doubt their own memory or perception of reality. Denying sending a message, twisting the meaning of text, selectively showing things out of context. While recordings can sometimes validate a victim's experience, they can also be powerfully misused by manipulators to control the narrative, just as Liam does. These digital archives become contested territories.
And the psychological impact of all this.
It's significant. Constantly documenting ourselves can affect our sense of identity. The permanence of digital records the inability to escape past mistakes or conflicts because they're perfectly preserved online, can fuel anxiety and rumination. That endless loop of negative thoughts. It undermines forgetting, which we need for healing and growth.
It's like Liam's redos, but with our phones.
Precisely. The ease with which we can digitally revisit and reanalyze past interactions, texts, posts-it, mirrors Liam's obsessive replaying. It can normalize an unhealthy level of scrutiny, potentially increasing anxiety and maybe eroding our capacity for forgiveness, for just letting things go because the evidence is always there, always accessible. Cognitive offloading onto tech might also be weakening our internal memory muscles, maybe.
So wrapping this up, what's the big takeaway from the episode and all this material we've looked at?
I think the core suggestion is that human relationships, and maybe even our psychological well-being, don't necessarily thrive on perfect recall and absolute objective truth. They might depend much more on fuzzier things: trust, forgiveness, empathy, the ability to navigate nuance, and crucially, the capacity to selectively forget or reframe the past to allow for growth and healing.
So the pursuit of clarity through technology can backfire.
Profoundly, it seems. The episode suggests that striving for that kind of total technological clarity, like the grain offers, can be incredibly damaging. It potentially trades emotional depth, resilience, and the possibility of moving on for a kind of brittle, unforgiving, and ultimately maybe illusory objectivity.
It really feels like the central idea is that human perception, emotion, bias, our need for narrative, these aren't just flaws that technology needs to fix. They're actually intrinsic to how we experience reality and truth itself.
Well put.
Trying to engineer them away with promises of objective tech doesn't necessarily lead to a purer truth. It seems it often leads to a more painful, less manageable, and ultimately less human engagement with our lives and relationships.
Yeah.
So here's a final thought for you, the listener, based on our deep dive today. If we actually had perfect, undeniable records of every single moment, would that kind of absolute transparency make our relationships stronger through honesty? Or would it make them impossible, crushed under the weight of unforgiving data and endless rumination? How much ambiguity, how much ability to forget do we actually need to be happy, to trust, and simply to live together?
Thanks for listening to Mythos AI. Stay tuned for more concise insights. And remember to hit the like button and subscribe for future episodes.